All right, well, welcome again. We've got another OSHA quick take with Conn, Maciel, Carey, and today we're going to be talking about OSHA's here, how to prepare and how to manage the OSHA inspection. And with me today is Aaron and Ashley, and I'll just maybe turn it over to them quickly to kind of give a quick introduction and a background, and then we'll jump right into the topic.
Great. Thanks, Scott. It's good to chat with you again. Hard to believe it's been, I think, almost 6 months since the last time we spoke, getting ready to kick off the year's program or programs. So I'm Aaron Gelb, one of the managing partners of the firm. I'm based in Chicago, where I lead the firm's Midwest OSHA practice, which is pretty broad, expanse from Illinois. A lot of my work in Illinois, Wisconsin, Ohio, Indiana, Iowa, and beyond. Certainly not limited to the Midwest, but that's a big part of my focus. I've been a management side OSHA defense lawyer for the better part of 2+ decades. So happy to be presenting. This is one of my favorite webinars, one of my favorite presentations. We're going to hopefully share a lot of war stories and examples of things that we've encountered over the years. So looking forward to it.
Great, Ashley, you want to?
Thanks, Scott. So I am Ashley Mitchell. I am also an attorney in Conn, Maciel, Carey's Chicago office. I'm working with Aaron Gelb. As Aaron said, our practice is based in the Midwest, but we cover, quite a broad geographic range here. I personally have done multiple on-site inspections, and so this is also one of those topics that I find to be just a little bit easier to talk about, just from the diverse amount of things that I've seen. The one thing that I would, as we give our little teaser, encourage everyone to think about and remember, there are multiple things that are going to come up, and my experience has taught me that there isn't one right or wrong answer. You are going with this flow of your investigation, the flow of your compliance officer, and the needs of the company. So I certainly look forward to discussing this topic.
Yeah, great. And I should mention too, before we get into it, that today we're doing the OSHA quick take. So, 15-20 minute teaser for the webinar that Conn, Maciel, Carey will be hosting on June 8th. So full hour or more, I guess, depending on questions.
Yeah.
I imagine this topic gets a lot of questions. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about employers' goal for managing an inspection. We'll talk about steps employers can take to prepare in advance for an inspection. We'll talk about employee and employer rights, and then the stages of the inspection, and not necessarily in that order. But I know Aaron was going to kick off with talking about goals and steps.
Yeah, and this, like you said, I would say I would let participants know that of all the webinars that we do, I think this is the one that has the potential to go beyond an hour, because I think in part we have so many stories to tell, and really few things are more important than effectively managing and preparing for an inspection, right? Because so much flows from that. The citations flow from it. Or hazard alert letters, or hopefully no citations, and a lot of that can depend on how the inspection goes. And so, kind of buckle up for maybe anywhere from 75 to 90 minutes, and inevitably, I think you watch the number of people who are logged in. Very few people drop off because there is a lot of good information. But as far as the goals go. And we know that every employer may have different goals going into an inspection, depending on their past history, depending on the nature of the inspection, whether it was open in response to a fatality, or serious an amputation or hospitalization or a complaint. There's union organizing going on in the background, et cetera. There are a whole host of different considerations. It's something we always work with the client to understand that context, but generally, and we'll of course dig into this in more detail. Primary objectives or goals of any inspection are to minimize disruption to the business. We know that an OSHA inspection can be very stressful. It can pull people away from their regular jobs, and in fact, in some cases, kind of have the unfortunate outcome of pulling the safety people away from the actual proactive safety tasks or objectives that they have, because they're reactive. They're dealing with a difficult compliance officer in some cases, jumping through hoops. And so we also, I think, from a more kind of immediate standpoint, recognize and see inspections where oftentimes we're brought in the middle, where the compliance officer has been there for days, has conducted X number of interviews, is really kind of almost setting up shop in some cases where the employer doesn't really understand their rights. And we'll talk. Ashley's going to talk about, we're going to talk about those rights in a little bit. And so it's just helping the employer recognize, what is reasonable, where can we kind of push back or at least reach a compromise so the inspection is not as disruptive as it otherwise could be. Another big part is just managing the flow of information. That can apply to something as simple and mandatory as the 300 logs, making sure that those are provided in a timely manner. Talking about some strategies to make sure that you don't get caught if there's an oral agreement to produce them later than the 4-hour requirement. Some suggestions there. Then dealing with documents, trying to avoid potential for subpoenas, which OSHA, I think, is looking to expand the use of, kind of as a side note. But then talking about witness interviews and things that Ashley and I work on a lot is how do you manage and address hourly employee interviews, requests for the contact information, where OSHA appears to be interested in contacting people outside of normal working hours, perhaps off shift. What do you do if those are hourly employees? Selecting, preparing, defending management interviews, the comments and statements that can bind the company. So there's a lot of information, obviously, that can go both ways, but primarily from the company to OSHA. So we focus on that. And another part is casting the workplace in the best light possible. We know that many, if not most, of our clients have really good safety programs. They do a lot, but that doesn't always come out in the inspection. In part, maybe the employer doesn't know, how to explain something, or in a lot of cases, OSHA doesn't ask for it, right? And then we end up, it's not until after the citations issue or in the informal settlement conference or getting ready for it, that we surface certain things. We've seen in a couple recent inspections that we may talk about. In one where OSHA issued a lockout tagout citation about 10 days after the inspection opened. And so they made no effort to develop the misconduct offense, not surprisingly. And in another where OSHA waited till literally the last day to issue citations, issued a training violation, even though they never asked for training documents. But probably more likely is just where the employer may not think that they have exactly what OSHA is looking for. And instead of saying, oh, we don't have anything, kind of casting a broader net and making sure that you put that best foot forward. So those are really, I think, the primary goals, but we'll dig into those in a little bit more detail on June 8th.
Yeah, perfect. So Ashley, did you want to talk about the stages of the inspection with?
Yeah. So one of the first things that'll happen during an inspection, we're going to talk about your rights and, a little bit later, but you will not have a heads up notice that OSHA is going to show up. So the first thing that happens is the compliance officer is literally at your front door, at your management office, showing their credentials and saying, that they are there for an OSHA inspection. And so that is the first step. OSHA shows up, the next immediate step is generally going to be the opening conference, where they will outline the scope of the inspection, the reason for their inspection, whether it's due to an NEP, a national emphasis program, or a local emphasis program, whether it's due to an injury that you had or an employee complaint. And part of that scope will also be them identifying areas in the facility that they want to see, and just a general roadmap for what you can expect during that inspection. After that opening conference, typically the next step would be a walk around where the compliance officer will walk around the areas that they identified to you during the opening conference. There will certainly be some tips and tricks for how to deal with that and how to manage, what the compliance officer is able to see in the areas that you're walking through while still being cooperative during our June webinar. After that initial walk around, the compliance officer will most likely have a list of documents and information that they want to request, a list of employees that they want to interview, and certainly something we'll talk about during your rights, but, truly identifying as an employer, your next step would be identifying which of those witnesses that they would like to speak to are management, because you do have the right to participate and be present in those interviews. And then that will most likely conclude the first day of the inspection, but then OSHA has 6 months from the time that they open their inspection to issue citations, a hazard alert letter, or close it out without either. And so during that time, you will likely receive follow-up from your compliance officer requesting additional documents and information. They might request to do additional witness interviews. And again, they might request to come back on site and do additional walk around, take additional photos. So after that first day, where they're doing their opening conference, their walk around, and then a brief conference where they just kind of summarize and recap the day. It's not as structured for the next 6 months. And then at the end of their inspection period, you can expect that OSHA will conduct a closing conference where they will summarize all of the information that they have. The compliance officer will typically explain what citations they may be recommending and the rationale behind it. And then that compliance officer will explain next steps once you get those citations.
That's great. And yeah, we're gonna jump into the rights of employers and employees briefly, but did we miss any of the steps employers can take to prepare?
Yeah, I realized when I finished, I didn't cover that, but it's a good time, I think, almost to talk about preparation after, because when you don't prepare, the old saying, everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And I don't know if that's Mike Tyson who came up with that or someone else, but it really is, I think, very much applicable here, right? As Ashley's kind of gone through, that it's a surprise visit. And even if they're coming because you reported a fatality or an amputation, you don't know when, you don't know who necessarily. And so I find that if you, especially, but more so even with those emphasis program inspections where OSHA's showing up, even though you haven't reported anything, you haven't, no one's complained, you haven't had any incidents. So many mistakes are made at the very beginning. And whether that's some of the stories I've heard of sticking OSHA in a conference room with windows that look out on the facility, bringing too many people into the opening conference where OSHA is just the inspector is able to ask questions of a whole bunch of different people, people thinking that it's kind of a laid back and everyone's, friendly and they're just talking too much, making statements that might be admissions. And so, we'll go through a whole list of things like, having an inspection team pre-identified and backups for those people, because inevitably OSHA is going to show up when one or more of those people is not there. Ashley and I just went through this, I think, a month or so ago with a client where one site safety person was out for personal reasons, another was at a different facility out of the country. The neighboring site safety manager was also out. The corporate safety director was out. So there was almost, nobody minding the shop, so to speak, that day. So who do you call next? And then what do you do? How long can you make them wait? Who else do you need to call? What documents should you start gathering, if any? And just having that plan in place and just training those people so you get off on the right foot, because it's hard to recover, frankly, if you don't. So we'll definitely spend time talking about that and some other suggestions that we have, so folks can get off on the right foot.
Yeah, those are some great points. I can see all the questions that will be coming on the 8th to dig into that a little bit deeper. So, but again, at a high level, just as part of this quick take, what are some of those rights that employers and employees should be aware of?
Yeah, I think I'll talk a little bit about kind of the big picture of the right to a reasonable inspection, and maybe Ashley, then you could just kind of talk about the right to, particularly to counsel during interviews or throughout the inspection. We spend a lot of time. We always emphasize this whenever we talk about inspections. Is if you look at the OSHA Act itself, the word reasonable appears a number of times in the section on inspections, in terms of the OSHA having to conduct it at a reasonable time in a reasonable manner, and that really is kind of at the heart of I think one of the organizing principles that I adhere to when I'm managing inspections for clients, and that is, if you're not open, if you're not running a shift that afternoon or a line, more likely you don't have to start up a production line. If the compliance officer is trying to wait, extend interviews past close, inconvenience people, that it has to be reasonable. And I know it often doesn't feel reasonable, so that's something that if you say push back, but if you negotiate with OSHA in a way that you're reminding them of the need to be reasonable, both in terms of time and place and manner, they know that it's in their field operations manual, and when they're talking to somebody, when they're talking to someone that they know understands that, that I think often will result in an inspection that's a little bit easier to live with. So Ashley, if you want to maybe talk about the rights for the company as far as having counsel presence and interviews and such, hand it over to you.
Aaron. So yeah, the company absolutely has the right to counsel at each and every stage of the inspection. And so, for example, even though you will not have noticed that OSHA is going to be showing up on the day that they do, and that they're going to be opening an inspection, part of your, OSHA inspection team should have your counsel's number handy and ready to go, so that can be one of the first phone calls that they're making, right? And then your counsel can advise you on, what to do for opening conference, what to do for walk around, because you do have the right to have them present at each and every stage of the inspection. Likewise, for your management interviews, to the extent that OSHA is requesting to interview managers, you have the right to have your counsel be present for those interviews as well. And not just, OSHA gave you notice and 5 minutes later you are having your management interview, but actually have your attorney have that opportunity to really talk to your manager, speak with your manager, get an understanding of what your manager knows ahead of that interview. And, your counsel can and will advise you about timing of that. But certainly have a right to meaningfully participate in those management interviews. Likewise, as OSHA is making requests, you can have all of those directed directly to your counsel, and then you can work with counsel to determine what information you're sharing, what information you're going to mark as privileged, or what information isn't necessarily responsive at this time. I know Aaron mentioned also that from time to time, great safety programs in place, but they're just not a part of OSHA's request. And so, having your counsel participate will certainly help you to make that determination about what additional information you may choose to share with OSHA to really help them get a better understanding of the company, the equipment, the safety rules, and really just any safety programs that are in place. So, right to counsel, literally at every single turn of that inspection, start to finish.
Yeah, that's great. And I was going to ask that question, and of course your unbiased perspective, if that first call should be to the company's attorneys, before the inspection starts. So
Yeah, it's an interesting, it's especially with new clients, folks that are referred to us, haven't worked with us in the past. I often get will having a lawyer, will that anger OSHA? Will they, think we're trying to hide something? And my response to that is always, it's not having a lawyer participate in the inspection, it's the type of lawyer that participates, right? So if it's an employment lawyer or a corporate lawyer who just kind of handles things for your company, but doesn't know OSHA, it's not going to be terribly helpful. Or if it's someone who's unnecessarily combative, picking a fight over every little thing. It's not to say that there aren't times, obviously, to push back and limit what OSHA is doing, but so I think it's not having a lawyer, but the type of lawyer that gets involved in an inspection. And it may not be necessary at every step or every inspection, but I think certainly to your question, Scott, I certainly think you should reach out to OSHA to your lawyer when OSHA shows up to discuss, how they can help and whether it's important to have them involved, whether it's at the opening, in person, depending on where they're located, joining the opening conference by phone, while they're driving there to be there for the walk around or heading to the airport or whatever it is. There are a host of different ways that having counsel involved can make a difference, and just the eventual outcome. And so I think just in knowing also in advance, who do you call? What do you do if that person, the lawyer, is not available? With us, with such a big team, we usually keep our clients' phone trees. So if you can't reach me or Ashley, you can reach these other people. So that is definitely something to know in advance, right? That you have that right, and that you should, whether make an organizational decision if you're going to do that.
Right, and to kind of maybe put things into perspective a little bit, and I'm sure people see the OSHA citation news that gets shared out there. But last month we talked a little bit about the rulemaker, last 2 years of the current administration, and they seem to be trying to add additional teeth in their last 2 years to OSHA. So are you seeing, or can we expect more inspections than before? I think they're adding to the inspector pool, are they not?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I know that last year saw a pretty decent sized increase over the prior year. Part of that was just kind of returning to normalcy, or whatever the new normal is. I'm not sure what everybody has settled on is what we call this time.
Right.
But OSHA is back. I think back to normal operations. They're not talking about COVID anymore. When they show up, they're not wearing masks. They're not doing the JHAs that they used to do at the start, focusing on COVID. And they have hired quite a few new compliance officers. And so you'll see more inspections now with an experienced compliance officer who's being shadowed by a new one, or just a new one by themselves, which can pose some unique challenges. Someone who's either inexperienced and doesn't know what they're looking for, or they're trying to show how aggressive they can be.
Right.
Yeah, I think we're going to see more inspections, bigger fines. So all the more reason to make sure that you attend the webinar.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have that on Maciel Carey number on speed dial for when someone shows up at the door. Because the other thing I was going to ask, and I think you touched on it a little bit, and I know it's probably impossible to answer definitively, but is OSHA coming typically to help, identify problems, support the organization in addressing those, or are they coming in sort of swinging for the fence and trying to find the organization?
Yeah, I don't think they're there. They're not there to help, right? As much as there is that compliance or the free consultation service that is available to smaller employers, where they will come in and do kind of assessments. But it's an enforcement agency, and it's just like the police don't pull you over to compliment your good driving. And so OSHA is if they come there, I think it's the statistics are anywhere from 65 to 70% of all inspections result in at least one citation. And I think there is a pressure there to issue citations. Certainly, the more time that they spend at your facility, the more pressure I think that they are under to issue multiple citations. And so, it doesn't mean to not cooperate or to be unnecessarily difficult, but it just recognizes that if they were there in a purely consultative or compliance assistance manner, we'd be having a different conversation. But the reality is that they're not. And every compliance officer is different. Some are, I think, much more in that mindset, but then others clearly at some point in the inspection begin to take on what I would call a results-oriented approach, which is, they know the result that they want, and they're now, asking questions to get to that point instead of to get to the actual, the truth, so to speak. And that could be why you often see them not really investigating misconduct. Because they think there's a violation there and they're not really all that interested in the misconduct offense. So, I think that you need to go into inspections understanding that.
Well, yeah, I think that was a great summary of the webinar coming up on the 8th. We'll include the link, to that webinar so people can sign up and attend. Kind of like you said, Aaron, it's definitely a popular one with lots of questions. So you guys will be live, and there'll be an opportunity to get those questions in and hopefully get a little bit of reassurance that they know which path to take if an inspector shows up at the front door. So thanks Ashley, thanks Aaron for joining me today. We'll include your contact information below as well, so people can reach out and go through that directory tree that Aaron talked about within their organization and get to the right person. So,
all right, looking forward to it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.